Hey there YouTubers, welcome to DidgieTalks and part 2 of my 2019.28.2 software update. If you caught my first video, you would have known that I had a complete systems meltdown after installing the latest revision of the software. So my car's been with Tesla for a couple of days while they've done a basic rebuild on the software and the system, and got everything back up and running and working as far as I can tell. So I got an email from the guys yesterday to say that my car was ready for collection. Unfortunately it was a bit late in the day, so I'm heading down there to Birmingham this morning to pick up my car. In the meantime, as I'd said in the previous video, I've got a P90D loaner, which is a pre-facelift model with version 1 of the hardware, so a much older version of the car and of the software, and I talked about a few of the differences between the two. The fact that this car is actually in pretty good shape for a car that's done 61,000 miles and performs really well on the motorways with autopilot. But what I did notice was that this older hardware, even with software revision 2019.24.4, doesn't perform quite so well outside of its proper operating parameters. So when working on country roads like this one, or working on B roads, basically anything that's not a motorway or a dual carriageway, the car doesn't perform quite as well. What I have noticed is that with certain corners, certain sharpness, it will still creep over the line. I am finding that some cases it doesn't turn enough and drifts too close to the left-hand side of the road or to the edge of the road, and I've had to take over quite a few times. I'll try and catch that on camera for you. But yeah, I mean, and it ping-pongs quite a bit. I don't know, you may have noticed it just then on the video, that it's not quite as good at holding the lane in these sorts of roads. It's not quite as assured, it's not quite as confident, and just seems to be a little bit less planted, if you like, when using these types of roads in autopilot. Now again, I know that operating autopilot on these types of roads is outside of the formal operating parameters for autopilot. It's really designed for motorways and dual carriageways and so on. However, we all do it. We all use autopilot on these sorts of roads, and it usually performs really well, especially with my car, which is version 2.5 of the hardware. And when I pick my car up, I'll also do a brief test later on in this video about whether or not I'm seeing any autopilot improvements. So yeah, I mean, the one thing I did comment about this particular car, oh, and there it goes, it was getting a bit close to the line. I've actually had to take over again, but you see it's just really not quite as well sorted on these roads as later hardware and later software. But I guess a lot of the development has gone into the later hardware and the software for the later cars, and this is pre-Tesla's own hardware model, so this is using the Mobile technology. And whilst that is great, and I'm sure everybody with it is going to sing its praises for motorway use, yeah, it's really just not quite as good on these country lanes. So it creeps over to the left again, or crept over to the left, as you see. I had to take over again, but you see, really just simple roads, really. So these are roads that my car deals with absolutely flawlessly. They're not complicated, they're pretty sweeping. I've actually got it, it's a 60-mile-an-hour road, and I've actually got it set to 50 miles an hour because I'm a lot less confident with this version of the hardware in this car. It really just doesn't do the job. And it can't be trusted really to keep us safe and sound. So yeah, there you have it. It's definitely not. Let's have a look. We're coming up on some cars. It's still not braking. It's still not braking. It's still not braking, and I'm having to brake. So there you go. I think there are a couple examples there of how the older hardware and slightly older software really don't perform as well as the newer cars. And again, the newer cars have got version 3 hardware in them now, so I'm expecting that to be another level better improvement, a step change improvement on the 2.5 hardware that I've got in my car. I hope at some point to be able to test hardware 3. I'm not going to get it in my car for quite a while before they do a retrofit, but as soon as I get that, I will do some videos and see what kind of improvements we see. So there you go. Some examples there of how the older hardware and software just simply aren't as well sorted as 2.5 and above, which is what I have most experience with. Okay, so let's switch into the computer, go to driving, switch to Ludicrous mode, and let's get ourselves sorted for some ludicrous acceleration. There is a truck behind me, some cars coming the other way, but here we go. I'm going to start from slow. Let's go. Wow, my goodness. Wow, that just never gets old. That is ridiculous. Oh, I love that. Yeah, that really just never gets old. That's just something else. It was smooth, quiet, but ferocious all at the same time. Okay, so back in the trusty Steed. It's great having my own car back. Yes, it feels tighter than the old car. It just feels more bolted together, a little less loose, but you'd expect that. There's a big age difference between the two cars and mileage difference. But the other advantage of having the trusty Steed back is that I've had a chance to experience something else. I think you become desensitized to your own car, and probably don't notice things quite so much. So actually having her back means that I can give a really good direct comparison against the P90D that I've just been using, and at the same time just remind myself of the advantages and otherwise of this car over the older model. So as I said, already feels like it's a much tighter drive overall, and now we've got 28.2 installed. So I'm actually going to follow pretty much everything that Navigate on Autopilot asks me to do, and just see how it handles everything from a point of view of making decisions and deciding what it wants to do pre-full autonomy, and also how it gets on with those things it suggests, so lane changes and otherwise. So we're really slowing down. It's suggesting we change lanes, so I'm going to do what it asks, and yeah, I expect everything to act or perform really, really well. I mean, this car is now operating well within its design parameters on a 70-mile-an-hour dual carriageway, so it really should just act pretty or perform pretty flawlessly. It's not asking me to pull into the inside lane, which I would have done by now, but I'm relatively close to that car in front, so it's probably just keeping me here in order to save an unnecessary lane change. There are cars behind me, but we are at speed limit, so I'm not really holding anybody up. Yeah, I think already a lane hold or holding lane is just feels less movement, or it feels less jittery than the previous cars. It just feels more planted in the lane it's in. It's just asking me to change lane, so let's do that. The car was pulling up behind me actually, so maybe it was sensing that and just making sure that we didn't hold anyone up. But yeah, as I was saying, the car is just better in lane than the old hardware and the older car. It just seems to be moving less. It says to move out. There is a car pulling up behind me, which has now gone red. So I'm going to let that come through, and then see if it suggests again, which it has. Okay, good. So actually that car that just went past did flash to let me out. However, as I said, I wanted to really just test Navigate on Autopilot in all its glory. Just do the things it says I should do and see how it acts, and so far so good. So it's holding lane now in the overtaking lane, and there you go. So it's not hogging the overtaking lane, it's actually pulling me in. I did notice with older versions, whether or not there's much of a difference is difficult to measure at the moment, but I did notice with older versions it would hold me out in the overtaking lane unnecessarily for long periods of time. Even now we are catching those cars in front, but we're a long way off them, so maybe it's just preempting that we need to be out in this overtaking lane, which again I think is a good thing. I think it should always preempt. It's actually slowing the car down now for some reason and now speeding up again. So not sure what it was detecting at that point, but maybe the car in front of that, which has just pulled out into my lane. But there didn't really seem to be any reason why it needed to slow down. So maybe just being a bit overcautious, which I think is something that I hear quite a lot from other Tesla users and see quite a lot on the various forums, is that the car often appears to be a little overcautious. And again, I think for most people that's a good thing. I think they would rather the car was overcautious and therefore they felt comfortable letting it do what it needed to do than not. And I tend to agree with that. I think it's good having a car that's cautious, and you can make the choice as to whether you override it or whether you let it do what it wants to do. Now, I did notice prior to starting this video, I had been driving on country lanes, which is outside of its operating parameters, country lanes that were well marked, but nevertheless they weren't dual carriageways and they weren't motorways, so not really where the car is designed to perform at its best, or even designed to perform within its current configuration. I think it was 5 or 6 phantom braking episodes, whereas I think with the previous older version that I was driving quite a bit, there were no phantom braking issues. I didn't have one. Clearly I haven't driven it for quite as many miles as I do this one, but you know, I did a good 80-90 miles in the other car, in fact probably more like 100 miles, and I didn't have one phantom braking episode. So not sure if that's coincidental, probably not, given the number of miles that I covered in the previous car. In this car, yeah, I've already had a good number of phantom braking episodes in roads that are outside of its normal operating parameters, but I did drive quite a few miles outside of the normal operating parameters in the older model car. So maybe phantom braking, maybe that more cautious approach to autopilot is something that's prevalent in the later hardware and the later software working together. So that's not a bad thing in my view. Keeps you on your toes, which is also a good thing. Sometimes can be a little annoying. It does mean you have to have your foot ready to push the accelerator pedal quite often, because the car will be slowing down in places where it probably shouldn't, and you might have cars behind you. But again, that's really just an opportunity for you to stay alert and ready to take control, or at least to force the car to do things that autopilot is asking it not to, which is in some cases the right thing to do. So we're coming up to a 50-mile-an-hour zone here, and this is something I've commented on before. So we're going to go through the 50-mile-an-hour zone. We'll see the red circle on the dash has gone to 50, but the max speed stays at 70. So actually, if it wasn't for this car in front slowing us down to below 50, then this car would still be travelling at 70 miles an hour. I'm not sure why it does that. I'm still not sure why it does that, and I'd really appreciate anybody watching who has any comments or suggestions or information that might explain why the car has obviously noticed that we're in a 50-mile-an-hour zone, because the red speed indicator on the dash has gone to 50, but it hasn't limited the max speed down to 50 to match the speed limit on the road. I'll do a bit of research, see if I can find out any more about that. I might go on a few of the forums and see if anybody else can explain that behaviour. But if any of you guys watching think you know the reason for that, or know the reason for that, then I'd really appreciate your comments and let me know why it's doing that. You're not actually seeing it do it here because the cars in front are keeping us below the limit, but you see the max speed setting is still at 70, so were it not for the cars in front, we would be travelling at 70 in a 50-mile-an-hour zone, which it seems odd, given that the car knows that we're in a 50-mile-an-hour zone. So yeah, I'd really appreciate anybody with any information would explain why the car is doing that. And then into traffic, which is also an absolute pleasure in this car. We don't really have to pay too much attention. We still have to keep our hands on the wheel, and keep the pressure on to stop the nags. Oh, and while I'm on nags, it's something I've definitely noticed, and I've commented in a video where I was driving the older model car, is this car definitely seems to nag more often. And also, in order to remove that nag, I have to put more pressure on the steering for it to know that I'm here. Now that may be a physical thing, it may just be newer hardware, it may just be my car compared to another. I think there's every likelihood that that's something which is, there's slight variables or variances between the different cars for one reason or another. So the P90D definitely nagged me less, and the pressure I had to put on the wheel was definitely less in order to let the car know that I was still there. So I'm not going to do anything. The car knows we're pulling off here. Upcoming lane change is on the Mavic Air autopilot on the centre dash. So it knows there's a lane change and we're pulling off here. It just beeped. I think to tell me that it's going to do that. There you go. Indicates, turns off beautifully. Then indicates again a couple of times, and then stops, and then indicates and turns me off again. So exactly the same behaviour as I've seen with previous versions of the software. So no change there. And then back to normal autopilot because we're off of the dual carriageway. Roundabout up ahead. I don't expect it will stop me for the roundabout, but the car's in front wheel, so that's pretty cool. We'll put the indicator on anyway and just let the car do its thing, see what it does. Let's have a look. There you go. Car just took me completely off the motorway, off a second off ramp, and then down to the roundabout and the left turn on the roundabout with no intervention from me other than put the indicator on. So I did put the indicator on, but I didn't force the steering wheel or take it out of autopilot at all. So yeah, a little preview of full autonomy almost, where the car does some really good stuff. I love this car when it does that. Really stands out from anything else on the road in terms of its intelligence and its technology. And let's see what it does on this roundabout. It just navigated that roundabout. It wasn't a left turn off the roundabout, it was straight over on the roundabout. And as you can see, I'm still in autopilot, so I think a combination of road markings and seeing the edges of the road there, the car just navigated that roundabout without me. Yeah, this is going to be interesting because we've got a merging of the lanes and a car right in front of me. What's the car going to do? Right, slowed me down, seen the car in front, merged the lanes. This is great. Let's see what it does when it gets to the roundabout. Okay, it's keeping me a really good distance from the car in front, and I just put a little bit too much pressure on the steering there because I was just a little bit unsure about whether it would creep to the left hand side of the road. There was actually something in the road as well, and I was worried that the car was going to go over that. So actually I put the pressure on the wheel. I bottled out before the car did, but it did seem like it was actually handling it. I think were it not for that something in the road, I might have left it and it may just have handled that roundabout without me as well. I'm just heading into a village actually, so I'll leave autopilot running through this village. So it's already seen a speed change and taking me down to 30 miles an hour. It will now take me through this village. It's a really small village, really short village, so not a lot of driving in village conditions for this car, but there is quite a steep turn, or quite a sharp turn coming up to the right, which the car actually handles really well. Road markings are a bit faded, and it's variations in width in the road as we've got coming up here, but it always performs really well around here. So turning smoothly, and yeah, look at that. If anything, probably one of the smoother examples of how it's handled that corner before. So maybe that also is an improvement that we're getting with 28.2. driving through this village with no input from me. And because there's been no input from me, when we come out the other side of this village, around this left-hand turn, and then just a little further on, it goes back up to a 50-mile-an-hour road, and the car will adjust to the new speed and carry on with autopilot. There's the speed change road notice. Holds at 30 until it gets there, sees the change, and off we go. How cool is that? It's lovely. So I think that pretty much sums that up. So so far 28.2 performing really well. Motorways and navigating autopilot as great as ever, if not a bit better than previous versions, and actually some performance on some left-hand turns off of roundabouts and even straight across roundabouts without coming out of autopilot. So a little glimpse of the future there. I hope this video has helped you understand a little bit more about Tesla and autopilot. I hope it's also given you a bit of a glimpse of the latest version of the software if you haven't got it already. It looks like it's doing a good job. I hope this video has been informative, and if you're not a Tesla driver, has given you a taste of what you can get. If you like it, please subscribe. I really appreciate it, and please share, and give me any comments. Let me know what you think I could be doing differently or any better. I'm all ears. I'm really open to feedback, and thanks very much for watching and listening. I hope all goes well with you, and go well.